Hello, I'm Bobby Safransky, the events director here at Clean Air Council, and I'm excited to welcome you to the 2020 Greenfest Philly presented by Toyota Hybrids. If you're not familiar with Greenfest Philly, it's the area's largest environmental festival celebrating all things sustainable for the past 15 years. This year, the event is entirely virtual with live interactive programming scheduled from September 12th through Sunday, September 27th. You can see the full list of scheduled events at cleanair.org/greenfest. And be sure to RSVP for the Facebook event to get notifications as things are added or changed. Clean Air Council is a member-supported organization working to protect everyone's right to a healthy environment. Our over 8,000 members bring their passion into the fight for a better environment and health protections, and are the key to our ongoing work to protect public health and ecosystems. We need you with us. That means taking actions on alerts that we send out, giving us feedback on our programs, and spreading our work through social media. Finally, please consider making a donation. I'll post the link in the chat for anyone that wants to sign up and become a member. I'm here virtually with our own Russell Zerbo. He's our hazardous material specialist. So I'm going to kick it over to Russell, and I'll be here helping him. You can ask any questions directly in the chat, and I'll do my best to keep up and interrupt Russell.
Absolutely every slide, you're going to get the link for the actual website. So again, I'm going to toggle between these two just so you can think about it. So that railroad is American Street, and you can see that we are still dealing with this industrial legacy. This is a 1942 map, and again, just to toggle back, if you look at the chemical lab that's here, that is still vacant land, and still land that's probably being cleaned up, hopefully. So this historical map is really just a great way to sort of find out about your neighborhood. And then again, this is the L&I website that you can type in any address in the city of Philadelphia and get some really detailed permitting information. So once I realized that this was happening at 2722 Hancock, I wanted to see what they were actually doing, and they had a permit to remove these tanks. So that's exactly what is going on there. So again, there's no talk that I give where we don't talk about climate change. And it's happening. NOAA just called summer 2020 hottest ever in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you're trapped in your house during quarantine and it's the hottest summer ever and someone's tearing down a warehouse next to you, it's just a lot of issues happening at once. And I think it's really important, and you'll see from this presentation that we're trying to combine all those into a coherent way to look at public health in the city and beyond. So I like to divide it into these two strategies. There's proactive things that you can do on your own and with your neighbors. And then obviously we are also reacting to situations like that. Demolition and illegal dumping. So when you're thinking about being active in your neighborhood, I like to group it in these two ways. And this is a photo from Southwest Philly, specifically Eastwick, that had some really awful flooding issues compounded by their existing land contamination, a lot of environmental problems. So again, we were talking about air management services. If you are seeing smoke or dust come off of a property, please report it to air management services. It is illegal, especially if it's a small area. If it's a large permitted pollution source, like the power plant that's immediately south of the Grays Ferry Bridge on the east side, you can't really make a complaint about that because they have a permit to produce air pollution. But all of your small-time businesses and demolition sites in the city, they do not have air pollution permits, so literally anything coming off that site is totally illegal. This is a picture from our work in Kensington. A junkyard was taking rubber wiring or copper wiring covered in rubber and burning off the rubber because they wanted to scrap the metal. That is a dangerous way to do that, and it creates unnecessary air pollution. And open spray painting is completely in that category as well. It's something I hear about all the time. If you are spray painting at an auto vehicle shop or dealer, you need to have a proper ventilation system. And I've seen really wild pictures of people just doing it with a bandana around their mouth in someone's backyard. It's very dangerous, and again, most dangerous for the person doing that. These are some other city phone numbers. I'm not sure if people are aware, but you can directly call the water department about drainage and chemical issues. And there's even a more specific hazardous chemical water department line. 311 is a great resource, municipal radio after work hours. You definitely want to tell the people in your neighborhood that you're making a call. That is very important. And the reason I include this crossed out streets department phone number is because things change. I've been doing this work for a long time, and different departments take down or add phone numbers. We used to tell people to call the streets phone number, but then they aggregated into 311s just to give you an idea of how things change. And again, this is a shop in Southwest. I show this picture. I don't even know if people realize it is 100% illegal to have an unmarked vehicle just outside of a shop like this. They've literally taken away the side. And for people that have lived by this, you almost forget that a sidewalk is there. You almost forget that you have a sidewalk to protect. But that really messes with the neighborhood, and you don't necessarily see this, but Mount Moriah is directly across the street from this shop, which is one of the most beautiful slices of green space in the city. It's one of the largest as well. It's a place that I really like to go as a West Philly resident. And if you lived in this neighborhood, you would have a difficult time getting to that beautiful green space because of all these vehicles, not to mention some other nefarious activity at this shop. So just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that you might want to complain about: abandoned homes, lots, any sort of spray painting or dust. And I've done this work with L&I. I've done tours with L&I in Southwest around auto shops. We are working with them. This is not a sort of a casting of a blame situation. I mean, we're trying to help the city find these sites, and they have told us that they need that help because it would be impossible to investigate every single business running in the city of Philadelphia. So they have to go by who is making complaints. And that's how you get an inspection done. And L&I admits that. And it's great. We need that communication. That's how we're going to get the city out to these sites. And with that said, if you have a business in your neighborhood that you like, for sure, don't make a complaint. I showed this presentation. I did this over the summer, and someone was like, oh, well, I like my local auto shop. That's amazing. Give them a thumbs up. This is cleanair.org/complaints. This is kind of like a repository of all the phone numbers and online tools that I've mentioned. All of the mapping tools that I'll show you are linked on here. So this is kind of a one-stop shop, cleanair.org/complaints. And again, L&I is really putting themselves out there. I really like that they just have it in black and white up here. Anyone can report unlicensed contractors and unpermitted work in the city of Philadelphia. And in the past year or so, they've added this additional info email, and I'll show you, and I've actually used it to great effect. So they're really doing some interesting things in how 311 and L&I can work together, because the 311 format, which I'll show later, it doesn't give you so much room to sort of explain the situation. But then you can send a follow-up email, including your 311 complaint number, and really sort of get into it and supply some permit information. And I'm a professional, so I'm really good at doing that. If you want me to follow up on a 311 report that you made, just forward it to me, and I could send a follow-up email to L&I. So we've been talking about things happening outside your home, but it's important to consider that there are also environmental hazards in your home. And if you're a renter, you might be complaining about your landlord. You might be trying to get your landlord to fix a water, mold, all sorts of issues arise, even a carpeting or painting or toxic smells. That's a tough situation, dealing with your landlord. So you should contact the Fair Housing Commission before you start any sort of communication like that. If you have a concern about the density, if you think there's too many people living in your home, that's a common environmental problem. There are lots of illegal duplexes in the city. It's zoned for single family. The plumbing and fire code are set for single family, but there's multiple apartments in there, and that can get dangerous and illegal. But you also don't want any retribution from your landlord, so contact the Fair Housing Commission and they will try to support and protect you in that situation. So this is one of many, many maps that we're going to show. This is not a city map. This is our air monitoring network. And some of it is work that Clean Air Council has done with other groups on this, and some of it individuals. These are live air monitors outside of people's homes and businesses. And we have this really great project with Temple in association with Community Driven Research Day and the Village of Arts and Humanities, where in the next couple of months, I'm going to be installing 5 more of these in North Central Philly. So please get in contact if you live in that area, and especially if you're concerned about air pollution. We can get an air monitor on your house, and it's going to make making those dust complaints far, far easier. We've had really good success in Kensington with air monitor hosts and getting the proper information to the city about local air quality. It's a great way to tell the city that you're really serious about your air quality, and you have the proper data to back up a complaint, because it's very difficult, even though the person earlier did an amazing job of taking video of all that dust. Sometimes it gets very difficult to take photos of dust. So we like to think that our air monitors, it's kind of a digital photo. And obviously I can help you break down some of the information here. But yeah, go check it out, purpleair.com/map, and you can see every live air monitor running on planet Earth. And if you zoom into North Philly, you'll see a couple that I've installed with the help of our partners. And this is exactly what the monitor looks like. You can put it on the side of your house. I can zip tie it to any sort of fixture. It just has like a cell phone type of a cable that plugs in, and it syncs up with your wireless internet. And I think it's really cool that Weather Underground is starting to incorporate that data into the weather forecast. Because it's really like, just like you check the weather, you want to see what pollution levels are like that day. And you can look at the general air quality index, but you could also look at your own personal Purple Air monitor.
Russell, we have a couple questions. I just want to interrupt you real quick. One question from April is that they need fair housing information for landlord issues. Do you have that handy? Or is that something we can post in chat?
Yes, I will go. I just went back a couple slides. You could copy this email, but I'm going to just distribute this entire presentation. So you'll have, and in the notes section of the presentation, you'll have the actual websites that this is. But the phone number and email are right there. And feel free to send me an email. That's rzerbo@cleanair.org. Great question. Yeah, I've had success with the Fair Housing Commission. So please check them out.
And another question is wondering if we're in touch with Craig Johnson at Interpret Green regarding monitoring.
I love Craig. Craig and I work together all the time. He's helping me in Delaware. He does amazing work at the Cramp School in North Philly. Yeah, Craig is a great environmentalist in Philadelphia and Delaware. I really enjoy working with him.
That's it for now. You're good to go, Russell.
Okay. Yeah, keep them coming. So this is another way to look at your air quality. Goods across the board. Like to see that. This is just airnow.gov. And then again, in addition to incorporating sort of general air quality and the weather, you can also look at the pollen forecast as if you needed another thing to check or be worried about. And these look okay, but this is actually from yesterday, and other weeds are high. I kind of felt, I have asthma, and I'm sensitive to changes in the weather, so I kind of felt a little bit clogged respiratorily this week, and it might be because of increased weeds. And it's really interesting too, because there's mold in our atmosphere and then mold in our homes, and they are two completely different things. So there's a lot to think about. This is a great website. This is just the Asthma Center. And again, this is something that I wrote for Green Philly a little while ago. And mold is just a really crazy issue. We're talking about fair housing. This is what happens when you have unfair housing. You have water leakage. We basically make our homes out of paper. And then with climate change, it's more heat, more precipitation, and that is just a recipe for mold. There is almost like a mold epidemic in the city of Philadelphia. And unfortunately, it's actually not illegal to rent a property with mold in the city, unlike New York City, Los Angeles. It's in their landlord-tenant code. Not in Philly, so you're sort of a little bit of an uphill battle there, but we're working on it. So to talk more broadly about asthma, which is a huge issue in Philadelphia.
Also, can I interject for a second first with another question? This question is about potential migrating dust, and if something like that is anticipated for a proposed construction site, what's the best way to set up air monitoring before the pollution occurs?
Sure. Well, that's the thing, is you can't really. They're allowed to do construction, like they get construction companies get permits. They're allowed to do that. So I mean, you can go buy a purple air monitor if you don't live in the North Central Philly area where we have funds, where we're giving away 5 free air monitors. It costs about $240. But if you can afford to buy one, I would be happy to help you set it up. I've done many installations. So yeah, go check out purpleair.com. And if that $240 is in your price range, you want to install one of those. The tricky thing, because I feel like the person's question is more about like they want monitors around the facility. You're not really going to get that. The monitor is going to be at your home. I think the slide, this slide might just look a little fuzzy because it's the fine type in there. But I really wanted to get this in there because it's important to emphasize the just the incredibly tragic racial disparities with asthma in the city and the country. But yeah, if you want to install a purple air monitor on your home, it's very doable. But I would caution that it may not be worth it because you can only complain about dust from a construction site while it's happening. You can't make a preemptive complaint. So I'm not sure how having a monitor before the demolition began would help you. But yeah, they're for sale. And again, we are distributing them in North Philadelphia. Is that good, Bobby?
That's all for now. You can continue.
Yeah. So again, we talked about Philly having really bad asthma. It's really across the board in the northeastern United States. And then you can see the Ohio Valley. So these are the top 20 asthma capitals in the country. And they're all right up here. And I think one of the reasons for that is all of these cities have they're transportation hubs, they're industrial hubs. And as we're talking about mold and pollen, they're all literally built on swamps. From Boston to Richmond, Philadelphia included, all these cities are built on swamps. I feel like the problem in Ohio is more because of industrial pollution and then the Ohio Valley trapping air in there. But it's and if you read the Green Philly article, I pointed out it's a bit confusing because Los Angeles, and right now it's sort of obviously crazy wildfires is a massive air pollution issue. And while we're talking about it, all fires are an air pollution issue. That's one of the reasons why I emphasize landlord-tenant code and reporting lackluster construction operations, because a fire at a residential home could possibly be your highest exposure to air pollution imaginable. One of the big, I don't want to call it a success because it was a tragic event, but one of the ways we were able to help out in Kensington with our air monitoring project is we were already had our eye on a very large scrapyard on Somerset. So we had air monitors running around it, and then the thing exploded over the summer. And we actually had hard data about the effects of that fire. And it was sort of on the table of a California wildfire. So that's a good example of us sort of, in your case, yes, preempting an incident like that, but unfortunately it did not stop that fire from happening, even though the lot had all sorts of existing violations. So yeah, we are in the asthma belt. So what I was saying about Los Angeles is, even though they have far worse air pollution, the portion of their populace with asthma is actually lower than Philadelphia. And I think one of the reasons for that might be the humid, polleny, moldy nature of the Northeast, as we are built on swamps. So again, we're sort of zooming into the city, and I think it's really important. So we've said across the city, 1 in 4 kids have asthma. So if you are in a concentration of that in North Philly, it's 1 in 2. I mean, like, you're talking about a general city number that is already disheartening, and then in certain areas it's far worse. This is a bit of an interesting scientific thing. We actually don't, asthma is not like HIV or something else where you just kind of, you test for it, you either have it or you don't. So the reason why they measure asthma in hospitalization rate per 100,000 children is because if at any moment you are having a respiratory ailment, you have asthma in that situation. So I'm not sure if people realize this. But again, we've been talking about Kensington and North Philly. Why are we air monitoring there? Why are we doing this community organizing? It's because of this. It's because of the incredible asthma concentrations in that part of the city. And unfortunately, and these are all maps from the city that I urge you to interject in zoning discussions. It's tough for the city to argue with these maps, particularly in the zoning board, because they produce them. And unfortunately, you're going to see that basically every negative health indicator or environmental indicator has North and Southwest Philly leading the way, which is really unfortunate, or sort of falling behind, however you want to look at it. And this is a really big deal, and it's never been a big deal than during quarantine. Access to space, outdoor space, you need to go places. And when you don't have that access to green space, there's just all sorts of other negative health indicators, and it's harder to exercise, it's harder to do everything, harder to find places for your waste. So one of the real important uses of this information is in the zoning board. The zoning board does not like, there are very few open space proposals in the zoning board. Most of the appeals that come through there are for large developments, industrial things. So as a community member, you can stand up and say, well, my neighborhood doesn't have parks and recreational access. What about that? So this is a photo from an amazing paper that Professors Tina Rosen at Temple and Megan Heckert at Westchester produced. Once you get the presentation, there's a full link to this really tremendous paper they wrote about the combination of quarantine and racial racism, racial prejudices in Philly and elsewhere. And you see, this is Chester, Pennsylvania, down here, often known as like the world capital of environmental racism. So this is a tough chart, tough to deal with. People say it a lot, but it bears repeating that your zip code dictates your life expectancy. And you can even see in more affluent parts of South Philly, higher life expectancy and into the suburbs. So once you get the presentation, check out this paper that Professors Rosen and Heckert wrote. So again, we've been back and forth about housing quality, housing stock in the city. The city is very transparent about it. Violations are going up. And on one hand, it's good that the city is out there writing violations, but it's also scary to think about. You really need sound housing to avoid those mold issues and worst case scenario, a fire. So it's important to have this information. And then it gets kind of disgusting to think about the effects that pests will have once we're dealing with waste and demolition and poor housing stock and the infiltration of pests. which truly becomes an air quality issue because they leave their little presents behind, and that dries up and turns into dust in your home. So it's really important to do basic things like trying to minimize the amount of waste and ways that pests can get into your home. Very important. And then it would sort of really borne out. I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but what a crazy summer during quarantine with trash piling up and extreme rain and heat. There was some smelly days this summer in the city, and it's not just about sort of aesthetics. It leads to the infiltration of pests. And it's also important to think about, like, okay, I do have this rat problem, I might have an ant issue. Then that can sometimes drive people to bring all sorts of nasty chemicals into their home in the form of pesticides and insecticides. So that's something to think about too. You don't want to sort of create a problem trying to solve another one. So again, you see North Philly and Southwest getting the short end of the stick. This is the litter index from the Cabinet of Zero Waste that was just absorbed into our friends at the Office of Sustainability. Happy to see that still around. Office of Zero Waste does great work. So what this is based on is the aggregation of 311 complaints. If you're sort of questioning whether you should make a 311 complaint about an illegal dumping situation, you should, because it goes into this pool of data. This is how the city allocates resources for communities that need the most help shoring up their waste problems, which have gotten worse. So again, we mentioned the Office of Sustainability. They just sent me this week. They are doing tutorials teaching people how to use 311. So again, you'll have this presentation and this link, and you can take a course. I'm going to try to give you my crash course in 311 in the rest of this presentation. You can also see the city's training. So this is 311, one of my favorite things in the city. You can report anything. And one of the really cool things is you can see other people's reports. I'm not really a big social media person, but if the 311 platform is my favorite piece of social media, because it's the same thing. You get to have you get to like other people's comment, and just see what other people are reporting. You might even find an interesting person in your neighborhood that's doing the same good work that you're doing. I did not make this report, but I thought it showed a good diversity of issues. This person is complaining about a faulty bridge. You can complain about recycling collection, abandoned autos. This is that complaint. So it's a lot of options, and they keep adding options to Philly 311, which I think is great. So zoom into my personal, Russell. This is my personal 311 account, and people send me all the pictures all the time, and I make these reports, and I think it helps because I hope that the people at 311 know who I am. They respond well to my reports, and I try to be really detailed and professional and bring up permitting information at the bottom, which I don't see a lot of other people doing. And then again, I make these reports a lot for all sorts of different issues and try to be, I take it really seriously, and I think I get a good reaction from 311. And this was a very simple case. They were doing car repair on this lot, and I had to go in and find that they had a rejected zoning appeal for car repair. Nothing is supposed to be going on this lot, especially not car repair. And it's scary to think about sort of how muddy and rainy this is when you're doing oil changes and stuff like that. So again, this is another, I have a really great friend in Southwest Philly, and we are sort of really big nerds about these issues, and we're always trading these kinds of photographs, and I help her with reports. Again, no permits, no licenses for anything at this address, so they shouldn't be doing anything. And it's important for people to think that even in terms of tire piles, this is kind of a well-kept tire pile. I've seen some bad ones. But once the tire is off the car, that is hazardous waste. This is a big stack of hazardous waste. It's extremely flammable. Tires are made out of oil. it's not just me sort of concerned about aesthetics. But we will talk about mosquitoes a little bit later. And tires are really great at trapping water and encouraging the breeding of mosquitoes. But it's important to think about when you see a pile of tires, that's hazardous, easily combustible, hazardous waste. And that smoke that comes off of that during a fire is horrific. So again, this was just too delicious of a photo to not show you. And it's happened over the summer, and it's just one of those things scary to think about how hot it gets, and it rains. And this is food waste from a restaurant that just didn't want to pay their dumpster fees and was just walking their waste around the corner and dumping it. And this was sent to me by someone that I met at a tabling event, and we kind of hit it off and started talking about making 311 reports, and now every few months they'll make one for me, and I'll send it in. And we've gotten a good response. So this is an interesting case. This is to give you a really spotlight on some of my communication work and things that can happen in 311. They might come back and say, oh, well, that's not you reported that to the wrong thing. You reported that to the streets, but it's really an L&I issue. And there's a very fine distinction there, because even though the trash is in the street, so that should be the streets department jurisdiction, because it is associated with a business, it changes to an L&I situation. And it's not the city trying to be evasive or anything like that. It's just a jurisdictional problem. So I went on the L&I website, found the appropriate district, and sent them an email detailing my complaint and some of the other permitting information. So when you get sort of rebuffed or they tell you to change your complaint, go ahead and change that complaint. That doesn't mean that they're ignoring you. So this is an actual email that I sent to someone last week or so, and it was because of a really interesting situation. I mentioned mosquitoes earlier. So this individual reached out to me and said that their backyard was really mosquito-y, and they were concerned that some of the businesses in their area were trapping standing water. And it's well acknowledged that auto lots, sort of any kind of open lot, where you have tires and other things, they're really good at catching water and harboring mosquitoes. But you can't make a complaint about mosquitoes. This is not Brazil, where you can call your local municipality and they'll start writing violations for standing water and things like that. We don't have regulations like that in the city. But what I was able to do is go look up the permitting information for these shops on that block in Northeast Philly, and every single one just was completely out of compliance with their general permit. So this is why I say sort of you can't mention mosquitoes when you're making your complaint, because we don't have laws based on that. But all you have to say is all these permits are expired, and I'm watching these people do auto work, and I'm concerned about the risk of a fire hazard at an unpermitted business. So just an example of sort of really trying to think through an issue. And even though you're concerned about mosquitoes, it's sort of, you have to kind of flesh things out a little bit. So to zoom back to the litter index that I showed you earlier, this is what it looks like if you zoom into a property. And you'll see this address, 2544 Germantown Ave, come up a lot. This is the Village of Arts and Humanities, which is a really amazing organization in North Philly that I started working with and really enjoy. And one of the reasons why I really like this photograph is you see all these other areas are sort of in red or yellow, and they're getting a lot of waste complaints. You'll see some photos because the Village of Arts and Humanities really maintains their area. You have this little slice of green and otherwise red areas. So that was I thought that was interesting and a good way to demonstrate what the litter index looks like. And another really interesting thing about it is you get all this other information. You can see if your block has a block captain. If the answer is no, that's you. When you get this slide, there's going to be a link in the comments that shows you how to register to become a block captain. And one of the things that will give you is access to cleanup supplies and sort of better communication with the city if you are a block captain. various organizations and agencies that you're communicating with will take you a little bit more seriously, and you can do things like request stop signs, speed bumps. We'll talk about it, traffic safety a little bit later. But when I gave this presentation over the summer, someone was very concerned about reckless driving and how to report that. And I was like, oh, that's a tough one. You can't really call the police on the moment to report reckless driving. One of the things you can do is become a block captain and request better road design that will sort of make everybody travel a little bit safer. And also, you can see what the nearest Friends of group for a park is in your community. So you're looking at this. Rainbow de Colores, great park maintained by APM in North Philly. But that's pretty far away from this site. So you would know that no park in your neighborhood has the Friends of group. And this is a great toolkit to figure out how to do that. And again, this presentation has a link to actually the full toolkit, and I'm happy to help people go through that process. Because again, you start that Friends of group and you get a little more community cohesion. Preserve that beautiful piece of green space in your community. Speaking of green space, the great Michelle Kondo published this paper over the summer. Tree canopy increases life expectancy and brings down premature death. It is rough to talk about, but it's exciting for me because it's such an easy fix. More trees, healthier people. It's interesting because my organization almost, for many years, people say like, oh, well, trees reduce air pollution and they produce oxygen, which is very true, but they don't really do it at the scale that we produce air pollution. So that whole logic about like trees cleaning the air, like it's true, but it doesn't, it's not on the level that we create air pollution. But one of the things that trees really do, immediate positive effect, provide shade, create green space, allow places for water to go in your neighborhood. Trees do a lot of really amazing things. Help proper ecology. The trees were kind of demonized in the city because of the use of the tree of heaven, which is that tree that's roots are tearing apart your basement and sidewalk and all that stuff. We don't plant those in the city anymore. That was a mistake, and we're fixing it. So check out this report. This is the broad material from the Horticultural Society about how to get a tree in your yard or the street. You can read more about that. But I was excited that Parks and Rec and Tree Philly, in just a few weeks in October, they're going to be doing some different tree giveaways all across the city, different types of events. Again, you'll get this presentation with the link for this so you can really find out where they're giving away trees. And if you can handle it, you should go get one.
Russell, I wanna chime in here. There's actually a fun synergy with another one of our presentations that's actually being done next week, I believe, by BioPhilly. They're talking about how the actual title is living air conditioning. So they're talking about how plants and trees are on a large scale cooling our city and can be used to cool your own house. But I also wanted to, so that's next Monday at 6 o'clock. Very excited about that. You can see that on our schedule. But I also wanted to ask you a question coming from me, actually, and that is about how you might be able to get a tree if you live on a really narrow block that doesn't have wide enough sidewalks for a tree to actually be installed.
Yeah, that might, you might have to get creative on there and just do some potted plants, or even like a, like I have kind of like a big fir, actually inside my house, but I could leave it outside if I wanted to. That's just in a large pot. So yeah, I mean, the city is not going to let you, and you really shouldn't fully plant a tree in ground if you don't have a big enough sidewalk, because that can create real structural problems. but there's no reason to not get creative and try to do some different plants. I'm really partial to tomato plants, and I don't even worry about them giving me actual tomatoes. I just think they grow really quickly, smell good. They're sort of extremely resilient, especially if you're not worried about producing fruit. So yeah, that's definitely on you, but there's sort of a lot of creative options. And you can usually get free seeds. I mean, tomato plant seeds are everywhere. One of my in spider plants, if I could turn this computer, you would see a massive collection of spider plants that I have in my office and home. So those are nice plants to have as well. But it's funny, Bobby, that's a good transition because this is right in our neighborhood that I'm about to talk about. So over the summer, I got clued into this really amazing community organization, Neighbors for Healthy Community Development, around Malcolm X Park in West Philly. And one of the reasons why they contacted me is because they have this really crazy proposal that's happening right now. So I'm going to toggle between the slides real fast just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is the overhead view. That was what you were just looking at. It's in the center of this block in West Philly. It has one entrance, and the entrance is the exit. This is a really cool project that I got to participate in, and we've have a victory for now. And so this was an auto shop that they're trying to do a large residential housing development, market rate in West Philly. And I believe there to be some serious land contamination issues at this site. So we're really trying to stay on the developer to make sure that if they go ahead with their project, they do it as safely as humanly possible. And again, if you're looking for a good organization to support Neighbors for Healthy Community Development in West Philly, and one of the interesting things, and you'll read this article, and they don't mention me, but they mention the issue, is the developer has done soil testing with this structure there. So you're really missing out on possible contaminants that will emerge as they are digging up the foundation of this property. So it's important to think about if you're working with a community group on a development project and the developer is telling you that everything's fine, they haven't gone into that ground yet. And this is all governed by Act 2 of 1995 in the state of Pennsylvania. It is a state issue. The city of Philadelphia does not have a land health agency. And we're going to talk about it later. It's one of my really big issues in the city. You just saw we're covered in warehouses and coal yards and old soap factories and all kinds of stuff. And that pollutes our ground. And then when we do demolitions and construction, it kicks up all that dust. And it's really important to consider that most laws and regulations are made for the people that may in the future live on this property, but the main victims of the contaminated construction dust are those who have to live around the property while construction is happening. So I think that's a really important distinction to make, and because the law favors the end result of the project, not what you might have to deal with while it's happening. So again, it's a victory that NHCD made this petition and talked to L&I, and they rejected the current version of this project because it was a massive fire hazard. How are ambulances going to get in there if there is an incident? It's just obviously not safe. And it was a huge housing proposal. It was like 30 units or something really absurd. So again, we kind of opened the discussion to land contamination. If you can believe it, this is just one day's posting in, it's called the Pennsylvania Bulletin. I read it every Friday, pabulletin.com. And this is just a quick snapshot of all the different soil pollution cases that come up on any given week in the PA Bulletin. And I know lots of other organizations and lots of people in the city. So if I see something that I think someone I know might care about, I will share that, and we can start spreading information. And this one really jumped out to me because I live pretty close to Southwest Philly and work there a lot. This is the GE facility or the former GE facility at 69th and Elmwood. And you wouldn't know it by looking at it, because some people aren't familiar with this vocabulary, but they use the term site-specific standard, which basically means that the site is so polluted that they had to adopt a higher standard than the normal public health standards that are at play in the state of Pennsylvania. That is why you adopt a site-specific standard. And that also means that there can't be residential housing on this property because of the use of the site-specific standard. You can't have a residential site-specific standard. So we're not sure what's going to be built here, but they are remediating the land. And if you know Southwest, it's a huge plot of land. And then again, I love the historical map. It is the old West Philly office of the General Electric Company. And Southwest still really looks like this. The John Bartram School is still right there. So another map, when we're talking about land in the city, you might not want to go take your kids to go play on the old GE site, because there might be some land contamination there. You can look at the directory of city-owned lots in the city. And again, you'll get a link for this. So if you're curious about who owns what in your neighborhood, this is a really easy way to check that out and see where vacant land is in the city. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about maybe the single largest land use, land cleanup situation in Philadelphia history, maybe probably larger than Philadelphia history. And this is actually an article from today. The school board is taking their second vote about tax breaks or no tax breaks for the former refinery site. That is just a huge, this case is a huge priority for the Clean Air Council. We're probably going to be talking about the cleanup of the Philadelphia refinery for the next 10 or 20 years and what happens there after the fact. If people want to have a separate conversation about that, I'm happy to do so. But just to throw in some current events, this is taking place right now, this vote. And again, these are just some materials that Clean Air Council produced. If you get the slideshow, you'll get our full educational slideshow about cleanup at the Philly refinery. We are right in the middle of evaluating the permitting information for contamination at the site. And you can see we're very concerned for a couple of reasons. There's large amounts of lead in the soil. It's in this sort of floodplain. The whole thing might be underwater in 50 or 100 years. And there's been a lot of public events, and we keep asking these questions. And hopefully we'll get some answers soon. But yeah, when we're talking about hazard and land use in the city, no way I could give this presentation without talking about the refinery. So let's just take a breath. This is long. I will go as long as people want to listen to it. But Bobby, is everyone okay?
Everyone is good for now. Can you talk about, you're going to send the slides, right, to everyone that registered?
Yes. I'm going to put it in the chat as soon as I'm done, and then I'm going to email everyone with the video tomorrow.
Great. And the video will also be posted on the Greenfest Philly website, along with the video of all the other presentations from the this past week and next week as well.
Cool. So this is really tragic. We talked a little bit about traffic safety.
Russell, let me stop you real quick.
Yes.
There's two questions just flew in. I want to address them.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so Hannah asks, what work is being done to support small businesses that are polluting or are out of compliance due to struggles with finances or know-how rather than bad intent?
Oh, sure. I mean, the city wants to work. I mean, the city is not shutting down any businesses. And they have a real trouble collecting fines, to be honest with you. So I don't believe that L&I is putting anyone out of business with their violations. It takes years to secure a violation case. I'm not sure people are aware of this, but it's not even the Department of License and Inspection that collects their violation fees. It turns into a court case that's presided over by a judge. And in a lot of situations, the judge and L&I will separately both give the property owner ample time to comply with the violation, as much as like 6 months to a year, just as you're going through that legal process. And I've been in situations where, the case has been in court for a year, and then the property owner fixes their violation, and then the whole thing is just moot. So no, there's so much time. I mean, you literally get years to fix your violations before L&I or the law department will try to collect a fine.
And another question is from Becca asking, how does a site get this site-specific standard designation, especially when testing is left up to the developer of a site and state standards are so low?
Yes, that is, the site-specific standard is written into Act 2. That is a part of the law that says that if you don't think you can meet the normal standards, you can ask for a higher one. And the logic from the state's perspective, and again, this is strictly a state issue, is not a city issue. The logic is that there's two ways to measure pollutants in the ground. You can sort of physically test that dirt, or you can look at the exposure method. So that's how the site-specific standard works, is if you have that higher pollutant concentration, you have to do a little bit more work to justify that even though the ground is polluted, there's no way anything is coming out of there. Like, for example, the new owners of the former refinery are proposing to completely asphalt the site, which cuts down on the exposure pathway. And I'll admit that it's kind of a catch-22, because we obviously don't want any pollutants in the ground to migrate, but especially in the case of the refinery, that's 100 acres of new asphalt next to a river. There's going to be some stormwater issues there. But great question, Becca. It's written into Act 2 of 1995, and the legal explanation is that if you somehow move the exposure pathway, you can have a higher concentration of pollutants.
Okay, I do believe those are all the questions. We are all caught up, and you can continue.
Okay, great. So again, unfortunately, and this is not, there's, I believe 3 people were killed on the Cobbs Creek Parkway in traffic accidents this summer. And it's taken a huge amount of public outcry to get PennDOT to do really simple things like just speed bumps and trying to get people to slow down. And it's another situation. Clean Air Council has this amazing program from our transportation team on the Cobbs Creek Trail, some of the coolest green space in the city. But if you have to cross this incredibly dangerous road to get there, that really cuts off communities from green space that they might have access to. So I hope more needs to be done in terms of traffic safety. It's important that we include that in hazards in Philadelphia, because we have a lot of them. This is a live map that you can check out. It shows where there are traffic fatalities in the city. And unfortunately, again, this is North Philly. You see a lot of them on Lehigh Ave, Allegheny Ave, these really big streets that have some trouble crossing. And then when you compound some of the illegal dumping and illegal parking issues, it's really hard to get around some of these neighborhoods. It might lead you to be walking in the street, which is a problem. And again, I'm not sure if people on the phone realize this, but Philadelphia is actually the deadliest city in the United States to be a pedestrian or a cyclist. Just let that sink in for a second. When you measure it per capita, this chart is true, and LA is up there too, But LA has no business being compared to Philadelphia. Like LA is full of highways, and it's just like such a different city than Philadelphia. Philadelphia should be so much better. It doesn't have highways and the difficulties that LA has. So this is a really cool reporting tool. I separate it from some of the other tools because it is non-binding. But if you are dealing with some traffic issues in your neighborhood, go check out the Vision Zero reporting tool, because this information is going to be used in the future to try to allocate resources to certain areas. So again, it's non-binding, but in all situations, we have to gather information before we get good regulations or better funding. So again, we've been showing all kinds of maps. We were talking about shading. This is the effects of that. The heat island, this is the city's heat vulnerability index. And the Office of Sustainability concluded that there can be as much as a 22-degree heat differential, depending on what part of the city you live in. So if it's 95, it could be 115 in your neighborhood because of incredible aggregations of asphalt, concrete, and just things that trap heat, unlike green space and dirt, which release heat. So another thing to consider, especially when we're talking about climate change and how sort of global issues relate to the city, this is how our sort of built environment traps heat.
We have another question on the docket.
Sure.
Chris asks, for disposal of wastes, are households subject to the same requirements as companies? If not, what protections exist for the disposal of household waste?
Oh, that's a tough one. You should be. We showed it earlier. One of the slides on the city's litter index shows you the locations of the city's sanitation centers, which is where you want to bring all that nasty stuff that you shouldn't be throwing away. Batteries, paint. We live in this digital age now. It's really bad that we're all throwing away televisions and computers. You should really participate in electronic recycling. There are laws on the books about sort of what you can and can't throw away from your household. But in my experience, they are not really enforced. And I think one of the obvious examples of that is you are supposed to cover a mattress. If you're throwing away a mattress, and I did this over the summer, I went and bought a mattress cover because I don't want my trash person, my sanitation worker, to be mad at me. So I went and bought a mattress cover online. The shipping cost more than the actual thing, and covered this mattress I was throwing away. But all the time I walk around the city and see people just throwing away uncovered mattresses, and I feel really bad for the sanitation worker that has to. It's just kind of gross to have to handle someone's raw mattress like that. And one of the interesting things about that I'm not sure people realize is that most furniture, mattresses, they're coated with flame retardants for good reason. But then when it rains, those are chemicals that are going down the drain. So yeah, that's a tough one. We don't really write a lot of tickets in Philly for household waste disposal, and you can kind of just put whatever you want in your trash can. But there are some real risks there, and they end up being felt in landfill contaminations and illegal dumpings. It's one of the reasons why I think there's so much illegal dumping in the city, is because people don't want to deal with properly disposing of their waste, so it's just easier for them to go dump it somewhere. So that's a great question. Lots more work to do with on that issue, and that's a really it's a person to person. I'm glad the person brought that up because I'm talking about reporting all this stuff, and it seems kind of technical. But some issues you just got to talk to your neighbors, and I think the household waste issue is one of them. So it was really hard when the city was getting hot this summer because they couldn't do their cooling center program. Libraries were closed. Everything was closed. So one of the interesting things, the pilot projects they brought out, was a cooling bus. They parked a couple of buses in different parts in the city with air conditioner running. That program's just starting. I hope next summer, and I'm sure next summer there'll be some more creative solutions. to all the city's heat problems. So again, this is kind of an interesting issue in the context of the discussion of household waste. This is impervious area. This is your water bill in the city. I'm not sure if people realize, I mean, I'm sure that you know that you're paying your water bill. But people may not realize that you are literally paying for impervious area on your property. You are paying for the rainwater that you pick down the drain. That's a good thing. 10 or 20 years ago, the water department realized that it was costing them as much, if not more, to take stormwater down the drain than it was to give you clean water. So it started billing you for the amount of water that you push down the drain. So this is really cool. You can look up your property, your neighbor's property, anything in the city, and you can see what everyone's water bill is. And you can also see the general impervious area concentration in your community. If you're dealing with flooding problems, go and look at your neighborhood on this. There might be no green space in your area. There may be literally no place for water to go. So that's an important thing. If you're dealing with an issue like that, you got to start communicating with groups and city agencies. Like, there needs to be some green space in my neighborhood so that my basement doesn't flood. Because right now, I'm catching all the water. So if people have more questions about their water bill, that always gets people's minds going. So again, you'll get this action. We're talking about water and heat, and I would be remiss if we didn't talk about federal greenhouse gas at the state and federal level. It's crazy because the city of Philadelphia has to deal with the effects of climate change. The state is trying some new programs to minimize greenhouse gas pollution, and the federal government is just trying to get rid of environmental protection. But I'm really happy that the Clean Air Council and Earth Justice and other groups are challenging the most recent rollback of greenhouse gas policy in this country. So you'll get this link and there'll be an action. Or you could just go to cleanair.org/action-items. We're asking all your federal elected officials to support our lawsuit against the federal government's rollback of methane pollution standards. And thankfully, the state of Pennsylvania has their own lawsuit with 19 other states in the country. That's very similar. We're all appealing this dreaded gutting of greenhouse gas policy. And again, this is the state's effort. This is their first attempt at regulating methane leakage from existing sources of methane pollution, oil and gas facilities in the state of Pennsylvania, which is the second most gas producing state in the United States, I believe. So we really need to reduce that pollution to combat climate change. So in Philly, we're not feeling these effects so much. So again, I mentioned some of the great work that Professor Tina Rosen is doing. This is an op-ed that we wrote together this summer, just as it was starting to get hot. And we really tried to combine all these issues. We're talking about deep poverty and racism in the city. We're talking about the effects of COVID-19, all in the context of greenhouse gas policy and a really, really hot Philly summer. We talk about housing stock, all sorts of issues. So that's a nice lengthy read with all sorts of resources and links, just like this presentation. So again, just like African Americans have bear a disproportionate portion of the asthma burden, one of the reasons because of that is because oil and gas facilities are concentrated in Black neighborhoods. Unfortunately, we talked about Chester earlier. That is a majority Black city that just has so many pollution sources individually permitted. I'm really excited. The state of New Jersey is on the cusp of passing, really for me, the first real piece of environmental justice legislation in this country, really looking at demographic information and the concentration of pollution sources. One of the problems with environmental regulation in general is everything is permitted individually. So there's not good regulation that looks at the total impact of pollution sources. And even in a Philly neighborhood, especially, it's one of the issues we bring up in North and Southwest. It's like, why do we need industry on every corner And it's not like that in other parts of the city. It's not like that in University City. It's not like that in Queen Village. But in certain parts of the city, there's just a disproportionate amount of industry. And that really bears out across the country. And this is a great report from the NAACP about that. I'm going to try to whip through the rest of this because it is approaching on time and everybody's been super patient. I really appreciate all the questions. This is Philly Atlas. Again, I'm picking on the Village of Arts and Humanities because I don't want to we do a lot of blaming. I want to bring up the groups that I work with that I love. You can see how much it's assessed value, its sale price. And then if you go down on Philly Atlas, you can see all sorts of permitting information. And again, they have these really cool gardens at the Village of Arts and Humanities, which I appreciate. So again, you can check out all their permitting information. You could literally type in any address in the city of Philadelphia and look at all of their different permits and violations and zoning appeals. I find it incredibly useful. Or you can do the sort of the map perspective. Openmaps.philly.gov is a really great website. This is a long, long list of different boxes that you can check. I like this one because in my neighborhood, I want to know which buildings are vacant. I have a couple of vacant buildings on my block, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on because it might be flooding. Who knows? There might be animals gathering in there. Vacant property is a big problem. And then it kind of leads to overdevelopment and gentrification. When we sort of have all these vacant properties, it makes it really easy for developers to come in and just kind of steamroll neighborhoods when they can point and say, oh, we have a lot of vacant houses, you need our help anyway. So again, some other information you might want to have. Identifying unsafe structures. Philly is the highest density of row homes in the country. Baltimore is second. We're a way bigger city than Baltimore is. And if the row home next to me is unsafe, I want to know that information. Likewise, if someone is having a sewage problem, I want to know about that. And again, you can find zoning appeals that are happening in your neighborhood on this website as well. This is really interesting. This is a zoning appeal that happened on Tuesday. And I thought it was kind of funny because they were trying to change an auto shop into a social club. And this appeal was denied. Residents did not want a social club. And I think it's fair to say that this would be kind of a weird social club. This is that address. And then you'll see that if you go into the permitting information, you can see that they've been using it as a social club for some time. That's why they got this violation for a new use. They didn't get their proper zoning appeal done. And this case was actually rejected with enforcement, which means that they are going to keep issuing this violation because they do not have their new zoning usage. And again, it's not just because I don't like auto shops or I don't like social clubs or whatever. This place is getting hazardous material violations. Very concerning. If you're getting those types of violations, who knows what you've split on that property. I would not want to do my socializing there. And again, this is probably the most common violation that we see in the city. This is not having a welding permit. Anytime you put flame to metal, you've turned yourself into an industrial source that is air pollution. You need a welding permit. It's like the most basic thing that you can get, but unfortunately people don't have them, and it's really hard to enforce because the city has to literally catch you in the moment with the welder in your hand. And it's funny because all auto shops do is weld. So how can you have an auto shop and not do any welding? But if you're not welding at the moment the city arrives at you, you won't get this violation, which is how a lot of these violations are complied with. So again, so they got that hot work violation. They went and did the right thing. They got the hot work permit. And then I believe it expired and they didn't want to renew it. So they kind of went this social club route. Just more examples of the kind of information that you can get from the city. This is what the zoning calendar looks like. We have a lot of zoning cases in the city. There was a 5-month backlog during quarantine. A lot of the community groups I work with are having a lot of trouble. I won't say a lot. I mean, everybody's having to figure out a new strategy to meet and participate in the zoning board and just do general community cohesion work during this current quarantine. So this is an interesting thing that happens in the zoning board sometimes. They will grant your appeal for an auto shop, but they will give you a proviso, a provision. This says no tire storage, no outdoor tire storage. And then all we have to do is pull up Google Street View and see tire storage. And someone pointed this out at the last presentation. In terms of tire storage, this is very clean. This doesn't seem like much of an environmental hazard, but it's still important to consider that if you have a provision that says no outdoor tire storage, you should be fine. Somebody asked, but just an example of the kind of things that happen in the zoning board and then in enforcement. This was an interesting case a couple years ago. This site, you can see these tires from space. And they wanted to do, this site had no permits for anything. It was just kind of a dumping area. And someone wanted to open up an auto shop there. So there's kind of two sides of that coin. The community group already has a lot of auto shops, or the region already has a lot of auto shops. The community group is wary of auto shops because they operate illegally and cause pollution issues. But also you don't want to discourage, if someone's offering to put money in your community and try to clean up the site and have a legitimate business, that's a good thing. We don't want to get in the way of that. So the community group did this really interesting thing, is they asked for a temporary zoning appeal, which I think is a great tactic. It expires April 1st, 2021. So they basically gave the developer 2 years to clean up the site. They said they were going to clean it up and run a legit business. We'll give you 2 years. But it's going to be interesting to see how this is enforced. We're really going to have to keep tabs on when that temporary zoning appeal, or that temporary zoning permission expires. And again, it's not just because we don't like auto shops. They're getting waste material violations. You see all those tires, that's a fire hazard. It could really injure, and it's a real home. I mean, we're so close together in the city. It's scary to me to have all these waste and fuel issues and all these violations in such dense areas. We are nearing the end of this presentation. I really thank everyone for hanging with me and answering good questions, or asking good questions. I've tried to give good answers. So in addition to the zoning board, we have these other two agencies in the city of Philadelphia, Civic Design Review and the Planning Commission. And it's really interesting. You can look at big proposals going through your area. 2 really big housing proposals on Germantown Avenue. And if you went and clicked these are full developer plans. I really like reading about development and reading people's plans. So go and check out Civic Design Review. You can even go to their meetings. And one of the interesting things about everything being on Zoom now is it's open. You don't have to schlep yourself all the way to Civic Design Review. You can just pop it open on Zoom and see what your city is saying about recent development projects. So this is one of them. This is Red Lion Road in Northeast Philly. And they're going to build a large warehouse here, I believe. You can go check out the plans for it on Civic Design Review. And this site piqued my attention because even though they're developing this site, they actually used it as a dump for contaminated land from 2035 East Lehigh, which was it used to be an industrial site in Kensington, 2035 East Lehigh, and they wanted to build this big residential housing complex on it, and they got that zoning appeal, and they built that residential housing complex. It's right at Frankfurt and Lehigh. But they initially got their land cleanup plan rejected by the state of Pennsylvania because they weren't doing a good job at it. And one of the things that they kind of goofed in there was they were taking some of their contaminated dirt and bringing it to another contaminated site. which is actually legal under Act 2. If the site that you're bringing your dirt to is as contaminated as the dirt that you have, you can just kind of trade it back and forth. I thought that was kind of interesting. So again, just like civic design review, you can see what the Planning Commission is doing. You can read about previous meetings, upcoming meetings. This is how they're talking about land use in the city of Philadelphia. I'll talk about, these are just some general, I mean, there's repeating. Racism exists. Philadelphia is a majority minority city, and it also has the deepest poverty, or the largest 25% of Philadelphians live more than double below the poverty line. Biggest deep poverty in the country. We're losing affordable housing. We're getting lots of high cost housing. These are all from city reports. I did not make these slides. These are reports from your city about your city. And then again, 88% of homes built prior to 1980. Housing units without complete kitchens. You know what that leads to? Hot plates and other dangerous extension cord fire hazard situations. So yeah, this is from a great report about the city's housing condition that you can check out. And obviously, there's a lot of inequality that makes dealing with any sort of environmental hazard much more difficult because you're worried about taking care of your family and not 311. This is the city's zero litter plan or zero waste plan. Some interesting long-term and short-term priorities, how we sort of deal. And here's my favorite. I believe, an honorary member of the Scrapyard Task Force. So the city's working. This is not, please do not take this presentation as a sort of a condemnation of regulation of the city. But I'm certainly working to improve that. So again, public space is important. The city is looking at it. This kind of goes as to what I was talking about earlier in terms of the collection of fines. It happens in the Court of Common Pleas. And then those fines don't actually go anywhere. I would like to see the city have like a green fund, and that would encourage them to collect more fines and then do positive improvements with those monies. I think that kind of, not exactly answers, but gets to an earlier question about fines, is if you could see the good that fines were doing in your community, I think that would just be an overall good. But again, the city is tracking their investigations and their tickets, and it's an uphill battle. It's so hard to catch someone doing illegal dumping. It happens in the dead of night, oftentimes. So that's my information. I'm going to actually stop sharing. Oh man, I can't believe that all the attendees stayed on with us for that marathon presentation. Bobby, anybody else? Thoughts? Feelings?
We do have a question. Michelle asks, Philadelphia lacks housing options. How can we provide safe and affordable housing for those who can't afford it? And also, are there resources to help with that?
Great question. That resource is you. That resource is participating in the zoning board when market rate housing developments are coming through your community and telling the city that you want affordable housing. It's as simple as that. You just have to ask for it. I don't know how to, I don't know what else to say other than that. I guess I'm a resource. I can help you with those reports. But yeah, you have to, that's where community organizing comes in. Because if nobody opposes a project, it is getting approved. The city needs money. So they're not really in a position to say no to market rate housing proposals because they need money and they need people. But as a community group, you just have to oppose that and sort of, and then also work with your federal elected officials because a lot of public housing funds come through the federal government. I know that's probably not the answer that you want, but I think it's the right answer. Anybody else? Going once? Here, let me check. I haven't been able to look at the chat. I should be able to. You know what? Everybody are always talking about Nicetown. I've been in communication with a lot of people in Nicetown, but we still haven't found a good air monitor site because it's really I need to access your internet and I need to plug it into your house, and that has been a larger barrier than you think. But if you have a site in Nicetown where you would let me access your internet and plug an air monitor into your home, yeah, we can make it happen. Thank you, Carl, for supporting my spider plant. If anybody wants, like, this, seriously, you can just, like, come into the office and get a spider plant. I have so many.
Maybe call first.
No, just call, yeah, just, it's cool with the building. Just come over. I should give out my personal address. It was actually, you know what, it's funny. If you go, I won't tell you what it was, but one of the maps I showed actually marked my home. So if anybody wants to dig into the presentation. All right. I mean, Bobby, any last plugs for what else we got going on, whatever's happening tomorrow?
Well, I think the interesting thing, Russell, is that your presentation touched on a lot of other presentations we have coming up. I mentioned BioPhilly, talking about living air conditioning next week. Robert Ruth from Clean Air Council is talking about the Reggie work that he's doing, and really interesting new things coming through, right? Russell, you were saying there's the Reggie just got adopted by Pennsylvania, so that's exciting.
It's not fully, oh my gosh, it's not been adopted yet. It has cleared one hurdle. It has cleared
there we go.
The Environmental Quality Board. There is a lot of opposition in the state of Pennsylvania, not from me, not from Clean Air Council, but it has become a very controversial issue, joining the regional greenhouse gas. Oh, a good question from Michelle. She has allergies. It's bad all year. How can the city improve its air quality? Great question. And it's tough. I mean, my previous answer to this question, so transportation, even though we didn't talk too much about it, we talked about sort of dangerous transportation issues. But transportation makes up the single largest source of pollution, of air pollution, in the city of Philadelphia. And it's a real problem because we used to get air pollution from our smokestacks, which are 75, 100 feet in the air. Now all of our air pollution comes out of like 1 foot off the ground, which is way closer to where our faces are. I actually didn't talk about that when we talked about the air monitoring. One of the real benefits of having an air monitor is you get to put it where your head is. The city's air monitors are on the tops of buildings and things like that. So even though the air quality is sort of not that different, it is different depending on what elevation you're at. So I used to say that the best way that you can improve air quality is to get out of your car, stop driving in the city. And lots of people cycle. Bobby's an amazing cyclist. I am a horrible cyclist. So I just take public transit, but obviously it's kind of rough to take public transit right now. So it is still the best way to reduce air pollution in the city, to get out of your vehicle and to tell other people to get out of their vehicles. And then there's all sorts of things the city can do to help with that. You can increase tolls. You can sort of take away parking and add green space. Hugely controversial in the city of Philadelphia. Hugely controversial. But that is, I mean, transportation is the biggest source of air pollution in the city. And then people don't think about this. Open up those windows. Do not cloister yourself in your home all the time. Because you need fresh air, even though there's air pollution out there. Still good. Yeah, Michelle is saying people won't listen or understand. They are. I mean, people already ride public transit. Lots of people take public transportation. So it's happening. People don't know that they're being amazing environmentalists by just walking on the bus. Yeah, it's a big one. I wish it was more complicated than that.
And a lot of the things that Russell's talking about, we actually, another plug for our schedule. I swear I haven't paid Russell to do this. But yeah,
I mean, we both get paid.
Exactly. Next Tuesday, also, our transportation department is doing a sustainable commuting lunch and learn at noon. That talks about, it's more geared towards businesses, but it's kind of talking about how employers can encourage their staff to commute in more sustainable ways rather than everyone driving their individual car to work. And there's also a Feet First Philly pedestrian advocacy guide on Friday, September 25th that kind of teaches people how to be an advocate for being a pedestrian, knowing what to look for in bad walking conditions and trying to make their neighborhoods more walkable, because that is very important. And Philadelphia is a generally walkable city. There are issues, but the center city is very close together. There are a lot of things that are very walkable in our city. So make sure you catch that. Make sure you go to cleanair.org/Greenfest to see our full schedule of events. There's still lots to come. The event's over September 27th. But again, all of these presentations will be live on our website, so you can watch them, rewatch them. Russell posted in the chat his presentation. So make sure you check that out. Make sure you save it. Go to all the links. There were lots of links, so I'm excited to see that. And there was another question that came through. Did you want to talk on that?
I absolutely want to address that question, because that's an excellent one. And I also want to sort of loop back in. Bobby, you mentioned sort of walkability and things like that. This might be an internalized feeling, but there's all sorts of reasons why people have discomfort in their vehicles. Maybe you live in an area where you don't think it's safe to walk around. Maybe you're in an area where there's cars parked on the sidewalk and you literally can't walk around. So I think there's so many vectors happening here that if we fixed all these small community problems, that sort of walking around your community would seem easier. Waiting at the bus stop would seem easier. But obviously that's a lot of issues. Wadi asked a great question. This is the question. Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot. You see it all the time. I am so grateful that I live on I think the coolest block in the city. I can hear my neighbor sweeping it literally wakes me up in the morning. I hear the sweeping happening 7 on the dot. And people talk to each other and we communicate. And if you're in a neighborhood like that, you don't want to be that odd person out that's not sweeping if other people are doing that. I know it's a tough issue. I mean, in terms of the trash properly, it was funny. I wish I didn't even realize this. Other cities give away trash cans. I was talking to my friend in Boston about having to go buy a trash can. He was like, "What the heck are you talking about? We just get trash cans." So I think that would help. More resources about waste collection. But I also, and I mean, I don't want to get too heavy with everyone, but I think with all of the gentrification that's happening in the city, it's hard for people to feel an ownership of their neighborhood. Because a lot of times, okay, you're doing all the right things. You're planting gardens and taking away your trash, and your neighborhood is beautiful. Sometimes that will lead to rising rent and developers and rising property taxes. So I think there's something kind of inside of people that tells them that if I do all these beautification things, that could be the first step of me getting kicked out of my neighborhood. So I think that in the city, we're starting to consider things like rent control, which I think would really help people feel safer in their neighborhoods. They wouldn't be worried about some developer coming in to price them out. So yeah, that's a really big question, and that is why sort of, if we're in conflict with each other, we can't focus all of our energy at the city, at the administration. And that's what developers and the sort of the powers that be want, is for you to be in conflict with your neighbors and not with them. So yeah, that's a big issue. And it's a very, just kind of an emotional change that has to happen. But there's also some policy things related, mostly rent control, not environmental issue. I guess not. I don't know.
Russell, well, thank you so much. Everyone should have in the chat the presentation. You should also have Russell's email address. Reach out to him. He's very excited about this. As you can see, he communicates with lots of people about lots of hazardous waste materials and issues in their neighborhood. Reach out to him. And I think if that's it, I want to thank you very much for spending the last hour and a half with us. This has been great.
Thanks, everybody.